5.
Everyone, this is the Ends Justify the Memes, the show where the lowest of the low, that is the most wretched of wretched and deplorable to end all deplorables, two heterosexual Christian males from the American South talk about culture, philosophy, history, health, fitness, and what it means to be a man in the 21st century. I'll be your host, Bill, and this is my co host and producer, Tank, wherever you are in the boxes today. And also, we have a special guest, once again, Mr. KizzaGT, a friend of the show. So, crack open a beer and lend us your ear because the ends always justify the memes. No beers today, Tank?
No, I'm drinking.
Oh,
I'm drinking wine again.
oh, okay, okay. What about you, Kizza? You got anything drinks going on over there?
I can only have a Pepsi Max as of right now.
All right. Well, I'm on sober October, so I got matcha tea and some honey. So, anyways, folks, we are live with Mr. KizzaGT, and he's been on the show before. And I don't know, how would you rate the last time you were on the show, Kizza?
Oh, I loved it. I loved it, and I did ask the folks if they wanted me to come back for round two. And by the guess of it, there was a big fat yes.
Awesome.
Yeah, we had a pretty good audience that day.
Yeah.
Actually, I think you gave us a few subscribers, which were quite small, so that's always nice.
Oh, I do
Um,
my bit of shilling.
yes. Well, that's the thing. I tank shills for us, but I'm not really big on the advertising front because I'm busy doing everything else, busy having a family and trying to build this small little voice that I have, and I'm not very good at marketing.
yeah.
Well, I mean, but sorry.
Yeah. And shilling for this show doesn't pay very well. I really like to get one of those shilling for Israel gigs. They seem to pay a lot better.
Oh, well, why not shill for the wokerati, as I like to call them?
Oh yeah. There's that too. Jeff Bezos pays pretty well.
I don't know, go woke, get broke, as they say, but it's hard,
Well, yeah,
it's hard to know.
the NBA has been. So I mean, I guess that's not what we're planning on talking about today, but the NBA does seem to be suffering a little bit.
Well, we can talk about whatever. I wanted to. I consider bringing in memes because there's just been some crazy memes going around this past week. But I figured with the guests we'd skip that and
Yeah. Don't worry, you don't worry. The audience can happily make some great memes by the time I'm done.
no doubt, no doubt. So the last time you were on, we were talking about your great pran. Can I talk today? I'm gonna talk Asian. We have a great plan today. Um, your great plan to restore a civil UK, or at least England. Screw the rest of the UK. But
Oh, that was more just the Western world, and I called it the Yuri counter plan.
okay, so you have a very specific plan for England itself, or the UK now.
Now, this is more like a kind of more of a question of what would you do if you was elected or selected as leader of the country, which I think is a topic in the political sphere nobody really talks about. People are quick to talk about problems, but they don't offer solutions.
Right. No, I agree. There tends to be a lot of complaining and not enough problem solving. And in fact, I would say that generally the way politics go is something like this. The politicians create a problem, people complain about the problem the politicians create, and then the politicians create another problem trying to solve the original problem. That seems to
Which
be the course of things in my opinion. So,
is why politicians make terrible engineers.
yes, no doubt. So I don't know, man. Why don't you just start from the beginning of some of your thoughts here, and we can ask some questions along the way and have some discussion.
Sure thing. So effectively, as my island is basically being run by a bunch of leftists pretending to be right wing, uh, and they've decided to push out so many wonderful, wonderful wokerati policies. I've just gotten sick to death of this for the past year, and I did come up with a quote unquote manifesto, and I use that term quite loosely, of how to fix my island if I was ruling as supreme emperor of the United Kingdom. The reason why I say Supreme Emperor, because it's a higher ranking than the Queen.
Yes, all power within Kizza's hands is what I would assume.
You have my attention.
Okay, so first of all, when it comes to United Kingdom, I guess both you gentlemen are aware of the European question.
If you are a actual European nation being separated from the rest of Europe, yes?
Well, I'm more speaking about the European Union. That's why
The
I call it
European
the
Union?
European. Yes.
Mm.
Okay.
Well, you see, that's the first little problem I got to deal with because of the whole topic of Brexit, which is a giant, complete dump fest. And I'm not joking when I say this. The entire 4 years of debacle can literally have been done in a matter of seconds with a revoking of an old piece of legislation.
Which legislation is that?
1972 European Communities Act, which was
What?
the very
Oh, I think
sorry,
you cut out there, Kizza.
yeah, the piece of legislation is the 1972 European Communities Act.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And that act referenced the Treaty of Accession, which what Edward Heath, who was Prime Minister of my country at the time, signed to join what was known as the EEC, as we now know it as the European Union.
Okay.
Now, if the government back in 2016 was serious about leaving the European Union, all they had to do was revoke that piece of legislation, which they have the power to do, and you could have got Brexit done literally in the snap of their fingers. Can be enforced, can also be revoked.
Mm-hmm.
Now, as the idea goes that I've replaced the yank twat, politely, Boris Johnson, and he is actually American. He was born in Queens, New York. I replace him by Her Majesty the Queen. Now I turn up to the European Union. A few friends, like the three big players in question, uh, Ursula von der Leyen, the current European Union Prime Minister, Michel Barnier, the current negotiator for the European Union, and Guy Verhofstadt, member of the European Council, come onto a very small dark room, and to forgive me for this very terrible impression, not make them an offer they can't refuse.
And this offer, is it does it require firepower, or like how does this go over with these guys?
Oh, you see, these people don't understand reason. I find these types of people only understand two things: power and fear. Me taking them to a dark room with a few friends and making them an offer that I can't refuse is me demonstrating what real power and fear is all about.
Okay.
So I will break the New Deal, as I like to call it, onto three categories: waters, legislation, and finance. What do you want to hear first?
Just go in that order would probably be good.
Okay, in terms of waters, now there's been lots of talk about fishing rights and waters access for quite recent times. New Deal basically states that any stretch of water within 500 miles of my island, only my nation can fish in. An exception clause for the Irish. More on that later.
Mm-hmm. So why do you think water control for England is that important?
Because the simple fact is we are an island, and having strong control of our waters is very important from a geopolitical standpoint.
I'd say historically, that's also been a large portion of obviously the economy and the uh, source of food in the UK.
Yeah,
Uh,
correct me if I'm wrong, but I was under the impression that the UK has to, I guess England is part of this, import a lot of food.
They do. The thing is, though, if you take, for instance, the fishing aspect, because previous governments decided to sell off our waters for a quick buck, they're basically saying now, no, right, we're taking complete access to the fishing water, right? And if anyone wants to buy the fish in question, they're gonna have to buy it from us directly.
Okay. Um, who else has control of your fishing waters?
Basically, the rest other companies inside the European Union
Okay.
itself.
Okay. So pretty much,
Also,
So all
Yeah.
of Western Europe basically has control, can fish in your waters.
Basically. But at
Okay.
the same time, we can fish in their waters. But the
Mhm.
problem is, there's been issues with that with the French, which have been nicknamed the Scallop Wars back in 2012 and 2017.
Mhm.
Also, neighboring countries like Norway have access to 200 miles worth of fishing waters, and I say, well, why don't we, as UK, have 500 miles worth of fishing waters? Because we're a bigger economy than Norway.
Right.
Because I'm a selfish nationalist bastard.
Well, I
Politely.
mean, you that very just talking about that very specifically, you're looking at the prevention of the tragedy of the commons, where having fishing lanes open for everyone and not being controlled essentially depopulates the fish population, and therefore you have food shortages, extinction, all that stuff. And we actually know that internationally this is an issue. It's actually a really huge issue when it comes to environmentalism. Tank and I have addressed some environmental issues, at least from a right leaning type perspective, conservative type perspective, if you would. And, i- while people are talking about these ethereal ideas like climate change, global warming, whatever else, there are greater things happening within our ecology globally, but that are more of a pressing issue. And I think overfishing is a big one. Um,
I mean, we do. I mean, they do implement. Sorry to interrupt. A thing known as the Common Fisheries Policy, which is trying to control the amount of fishing. Like every piece of bureaucracy, that has not done such a good job. If I
well,
were to describe, sorry to interrupt.
no, go ahead. Go ahead.
If I were to just give you an accurate description of the European Union, it's closer to the Tower of Babel than any sort of democracy it likes to claim it is.
Right.
Right. Well, also, like, if it's your waters, if it's your nation's waters, why shouldn't you get the ability to profit? Why shouldn't the UK get the ability to profit off of its own natural resources? Why should that be divided amongst the other European nations? Nations which the UK in general, whether it be England, Scotland, Wales, or that little portion of Northern Ireland, have really little common ancestry with. You guys have closer ancestry to or commons with Norse people than you do most of what Europe is. And
Yeah.
I just don't get where, I guess, allowing your natural resources to be raped by other societies is a good way to prop up your economy or your people or provide food, especially if you have to import food.
I mean, but like I said, the problem is that there is this thing I've heard people talk about, which is known as commerce, which basically says there's a what's known as a 12-mile limit beyond your borders in terms of the sea. The problem is with someone like France, the channel itself is at max 22 miles wide, so there's technically an overlap between where one ends and one begins. Now, my mentality is basically saying, screw you, EU. It's 500 miles within my island. So you think 500 miles from a small island like United Kingdom, I can fish pretty far out.
Yeah,
That's obviously
yeah.
fishing more. People like I'm not going to stop, for instance, yachts going from let's say from Newcastle to go to the Netherlands, for example. That's just frankly stupid. It just makes no sense. It's
How
more of our power play.
how wide is the English Channel there?
About 20. Well, I think it's around 20, 22-ish miles.
Okay.
It might be wider at different points though. So it's not very far if you think from, let's say, Devon to Calais. From you could swim it quite easily, and people do that. It takes a while and do it.
All right. So
Yeah, I was just curious how you would handle that specifically between, because you're talking like a greater range, but that specifically being off right off the coast of France and Belgium, what you would do, and the Netherlands, nonetheless. Um, what would you do with that land
I'm basically saying that
or
the
water,
waters
I should say?
themselves.
Sorry.
I'm just saying the fishing waters are now mine. If let's say, for example, I catch someone from France trying to catch fish there, I'd be like, and they're caught. I'd be like, that's £1 billion fine on the.
right.
Can't pay it. Well, then your country's going to pay for it. It's
So
basically me being an absolute giant manhood just slapping a giant manhood on the table saying "suck it."
Right. So I'm looking at a map of Western Europe right now to kind of reference myself here, but why would someone like Norway, like logistically speaking, why would they even want to come to the coast of the United Kingdom for fishing?
You see, where Norway is geographically speaking, it has access because it's not a part of the common fisheries policy.
Okay.
Have access to 200. They themselves 200
Okay.
miles worth of fishing water,
Okay.
which is a big economic coup for.
I see. But like, let's say any country in Western Europe, why would they? Well, I could kind of see France; they're pretty close or whatever. But, um, I mean, what is it about United or England's waters that are so special that these people want to be a part of it or inside of it?
It's largely because of the aquatic life. Like we do have, if memory serves, a lot of trout there, which is a
Okay,
very
I see.
which is big around and especially around, like say, the east side, but also it's quite big on the west side of the UK,
Mhm.
like Cornwall area.
Okay,
Ultimately, Spain is not too far from that itself.
right.
Oh yeah, there is that, but really it's just me being basically me. Effectively, this whole thing is about me being a giant child born to unmarried parents to Europe for the first part.
Well, that's fine. Yeah, I mean, I understand that situation. I just didn't, when you brought this whole thing up, I never even thought about England's fishing waters as being like an area of contention among Europe. This is pretty interesting. That's kind of why that's why I got
There's
myopic on it.
so much in contention is utterly
Yeah.
wrong.
Okay.
So yeah, the second part, which is legislation, basically as it's set right now, officially in Europe, if there is a conflict between national law and European law reigns supreme regardless of what it is.
Okay.
Now I'm basically saying, not anymore. If there is a conflict between English law and European law, English law reigns supreme.
Could you perhaps shed some light on why anyone would think that European law should reign supreme over England's national sovereignty?
Because they're federalist types like
Mm-hmm.
Guy Verhofstadt who wants to create a quote unquote United States of Europe.
Okay. Do you know what the motivations for that are, or is it just kind of like a weird progressive
Uh,
boner?
it's a byproduct of the aftermath of the coup, and basically and an element of supposedly speech is what Churchill said, trying to copy the US model without
Okay.
actually understanding why the US model or its flaws works.
Right. Well, and it's also this extension of these people who have been in power who discuss things about globalism, about having world government and all that. I think the real idea behind the European Union, which has been around for a long time, is to get that solidified, have its own centralized federal government amongst the European nations like the United States, and then do the same amongst South America, uh, Eastern Europe, and which was what the Soviet Union was about, and then the Asiatic nations. And that then, once you have the kind of regional nations set up, that then brings about this global government to oversee all of it. And so it's just levels of control and bureaucracy from the top down to the bottom, and that's one of the biggest things, right? I'm always talking about. Is eroding national sovereignty. And I'm a fan of decentralization and grassroots versus having these overarching authorities. I mean, I couldn't imagine being in the UK and basically having to kowtow to the interest of the rest of Europe, which has, again, very little in common with the history of the UK. It's a completely different culture. I mean, American culture comes out of that that old English British Empire culture, as well as Australian, Canadian, New Zealand. Um, we
Ecosphere in
literally
general.
are.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, if I were to give you a hilarious take on this, if any of you guys have seen this who might know this, there's an old BBC program called Yes Minister, which was made back in 1979, and they talk about the European topic in question, and they effectively mock it to the point where they basically describe it as the Tower of Babel.
Right.
And then when the minister says, "Oh, it's all about European coercion to opponents," and the guy mocks it and is like, "No, it's not. It's a
Hmm.
game plays for national selfish interest, which is why it had drums up so many arguments."
Hmm.
Like, oh, but we don't like the bureaucracy. I'm like, but the internationalism is part and parcel of the bureaucracy.
Right.
Right. And another interesting thing too, just historically, like if you go back, we talk about Germany being, a strong power. Well, Germany's very different than France. Had much disputes over time. Even there was some crossover with population. But Germany's always kind of been more toward the Eastern European side of things. And again, it's a different mentality. You got to recall that Slavs were, we get our modern word slave from that, or English word slave. Uh, they weren't really free people for the majority of history, unless you want to go way back into like very primitive tribal days. Um,
I
I
mean,
think it's a different, it provides this different kind of heritage and thought process than, at least from my perspective, than what someone from England and UK, where you guys have this 1,000-year history of bringing up about human rights and essentially developing freedom. And I would say the US was the final extension of that. It might not have fully happened there, but the United States, it happened here. And of course, we're allowing that sovereignty to go away piece by piece, year by year.
well, I mean, part of the reason for that is, I would argue, is the fact that we were an island versus the continent, and
Right.
also due to the fact we were invaded 4 times. That it's where, so, let's say, for instance, the continent, whereas, let's say, when it comes to, let's say, the Germans or Russians, etc., because of how vast their nation is, you don't that whereas if you're an island, you're actually humbled. Whereas if you're on a vast piece of land and a vast continent, you don't get humbled quite often. Which is, I
Yeah,
think,
somewhere to retreat to. Yeah, yeah.
which basically, which does explain, which can be, which partially does explain, let's say, some of the, I guess you could say, arrogance within the American mentality because of how vast America is. As, let's say, compared to, let's say, Canada, because Canada is extremely cold, has loads of mountains, it naturally sense. Whereas America, you have like deserts, shows that out,
Right.
which one
Well,
from
Canada also has a very small population. I think there's like
that I think it's like
20
36
million.
million. I think it's 36 million,
Yeah, yeah.
which is still a decent size. But I'm saying, if you look at the geographical sense, think of like some of your states, how big they are. They dwarf an island by a country mile.
Oh,
Hmm.
no doubt, no doubt.
Yeah.
Well, the reason why I brought up Canada too, or you brought up Canada, but I was talking
Yeah,
about the population, is because like New York State itself has almost the same population of the entire nation of Canada, and it is a
well,
great
it's like
vast expanse, but it's
it's like
hard
it's like
to.
California.
Yeah.
If California was a country, it would be richer and have more people than the United Kingdom.
Hmm.
As crazy as that sounds.
Yeah.
Right.
That
But
that's part of the reason why I have. Well, I think one of the issues with the United States is that it's so big, and there's so much, distance and different culture. I mean, I don't know. I don't know, Bill. What do you think? Do you think there's more difference between cultures in the United States than there are countries in the difference between cultures of countries in the European Union?
Not necessarily. It's interesting because we have open borders between states,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I take an old classically liberal approach to this. States themselves are supposed to be their own nations. But because we do have an open borders policy, there's a lot of bleed through. And
Right.
of course, with the internet age, there's more of that. But I think regionally there's a lot more cultures. And because also we are fundamentally, like, there are people who are right leaning who try to deny the idea that we're a melting pot. I mean, you just can't.
as he throws,
Oh, yeah. Hay fell out.
so we'll be back, right, guys? Just give us some technical mission.
Yeah. But I guess kind of
Into
go ahead.
intermission from Monty Python. Yes, sorry. We are getting a bit off topic. Wait till Bill to get back. We get back on topic.
Yeah. Um.
Yeah.
No, but I guess kind of keep going on that point. Before he gets back is I kind of wonder that because honestly, I don't really know the difference that much culturally between, say, England and Ireland. I mean, I can differentiate the accents and such, but um,
Oh, it's
like
funny you mentioned that, Tank.
okay,
Interrupt, but it's funny you mentioned that. So, if I take England for example,
hmm
how someone from London thinks and acts completely different to how someone, let's say, from the Cornwall side, which is that bit on the southwest thinks,
right,
and how someone thinks in, let's say, Yorkshire,
okay,
etc. So even though we're a small island, it's clear there's plenty of distinct differences in accents and mentalities throughout the island.
yeah, I guess that's true for a lot of states in the United States too. Like you take something like Virginia, people in the mountains are gonna be a lot different than people on the coast. Um,
Exactly. So
yeah,
if I was going to use the United States as an example, I could, like, for instance, I could tell someone, let's say, who's from, let's say, Central Hub
hmm
versus someone who's from either the coast sites just
right,
by their mentality alone.
okay,
Obviously, I'm saying this as an outside
hmm
instance. Someone from, let's say, Texas is going to have a different mentality to someone from, let's say New York, which is different to Alabama, which is different to California,
oh
etc.
yeah, I mean for sure.
I mean, there is a few overlaps in the sense
Mhm,
of, yes, you're all Americans, all for the most part speak English, etc.
right.
Your customs and how you go about things are still distinctly different.
Yeah, and even the most overlap I feel like you find in the United States is every major metropolitan city hub is culturally similar to each other, but outside of that area is where you find the most differences among the different regions.
Yeah, I mean, the cosmopolitan lifestyle, it's like a giant. Ironically enough, I do find I guess you would say, the Beverly Hills / New York style mentality
Mhm.
is trying to basically emphasize the sort of Italian sort of fashion mentality,
Yeah.
trying to Americanize it. But I
Mhm.
don't think they truly understand what makes, let's say, places like Milan very
Mhm.
distinct,
Right.
unique, as, let's say, what New York looks like. It makes it so easy to replicate.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
Well,
it's go ahead, Bill. Sorry, you back?
So a
well,
bit,
I was just going to say, sorry I cut out there. I missed
it's
all you
fine, it's
guys'
fine.
points. For some reason, Discord just shut down on my computer. I'm on my phone right now, so I'm
Okay,
trying
it's
to get.
okay. We end.
Yeah. Trying to get online here or something, see if I can get it to work. But
It's
um,
funny. I could see you on D-Load, but not on Discord.
yeah. Well, anyways, all I was saying, back to the point you were talking
Yeah.
about the differences in the U.S. Yeah, I was saying, I think right as I cut out, that this idea that we're a melting pot is totally true within the United States context. We're a bunch of people that came from different regions, mostly the Netherlands and then the UK, and we slowly integrated other folks in. And of course, we had slaves, and slaves were always from various regions. But
Yeah.
it, it's an interesting thing here in the U.S. because what that has, I think, led to is a lot of division that has allowed the central government to become more powerful.
Yeah. We
And I think that's what we saw maybe to some degree in the European Union, and what you'll always see when you cede way. We were supposed to have this weak federal government, and when you cede way to your own sovereignty to some entity above you, you weaken yourself and you make that thing stronger. And the fact that we have diverse cultures that don't have the single-minded thing, it's like, well, what is the single-mindedness on? Well, it's on the Fed. Uh, the federal government is the single-minded notion, so it's about who has the power. And of course, in the U.S. right now, it's a matter of the Democrats have had power in the United States for over 100 years. I just did a video on this on All Minus One the other day, and that two parts. Yeah, that I mean, it's kind of basic and me rambling my mouth like usual, but it just shows the history that the government in the United States has been in charge, has always been the Democrats since the modern age, since the modern era after the Civil War and the Reconstruction period. The Democrats have run everything up until recently, and people complain and they always want to, scapegoat the Republicans, but the reality is it's big government. It's this push away from constitutionalism and big government, and I think that has to do with this whole idea of us being too diverse. And instead of people focusing in and saying, "Well, we should make our states strong, we should make our communities strong," what they're doing is they're saying, "No, we need to make this federal organization strong, and we need to put our will upon the rest of society, the rest of the world." And it's like, I don't have jack crap in common out here with someone in California here in West Virginia. Like, we just have different needs, folks. There's nothing in common. There's no, unless I go up like a little bit where it's more forested in California. Like, we're not even talking about the same kind of terrain.
Sure, for sure. Yeah, I mean, as I was saying to Tank, Bill, before you went, I was explaining to Tank that even though the UK, or specifically England, is a small island, there's tons of differences within that island if you just go, let's say, 50 miles east, west, or north.
Right.
But anyway,
Well,
I think, yeah.
Well, I was about to say, you also have a longer heritage too, though. I mean, it's been an
That's true,
island.
yeah.
It's been occupied since it's been populated since at least the early Roman days,
Okay.
and it's had various populations run through it. You know, uh, uh, then you have an invasion of the Normans a little bit into and mixing in that with the Celts and the Norse influence. You have all these different influences over time, and of course, people couldn't travel as well as the UK was developing, and so you're going to have very localized customs and cultures. And the US, again, our heritage is at least originally out of the UK, and by then there was maybe some more homogeneity. So, um,
I mean, even though we had those invasions, we're still very much homogenous, and the main difference in homogenous came basically after the funny thing that people don't talk about. But, I think we're getting off topic. Let's get back to
Yeah.
the main discussion. But yes, the part regarding money. Now, I'm not sure if you gentlemen were keeping completely up top basic for the last 5 years with regarding the whole Brexit topic. There was constant repeat of this idea of a Bell's gone.
He's back. Yeah, I think it's switching back. There we go.
yeah. This should be better.
Okay, yeah,
I had to
Yeah.
restart the computer, so
it's fine. Yeah.
don't
So
know
anyway,
what was
yeah.
going on.
Yeah. Anyway, so I'm not sure if you guys heard about this across the pond. This topic of a Brexit bill.
No, I mean, here's my understanding of Brexit, and I think this is probably true for a lot of people who's kind of somewhat paying attention. This vote happened 5 years ago, and it kind of hasn't really went through yet. Is basically where I'm at on the whole situation.
That is a very simplistic interpretation. Yes.
Okay.
Yes, but basically, there's this talk of a Brexit bill, which the Europeans saying we have to pay to honor our commitments, yada yada yada. As my mentality is, well, hold on. That was under the condition that my mentality is, well, hold on. There's nothing in the law saying we have to pay you money, technically speaking. Secondly of all, the whole idea of we paying you something, that was the idea as if we were still in it. We don't want to be in it. And also, they throw numbers out there, something like 100 million and all that, and then they apparently settled with something like 39 billion pounds, sorry. But me, I'm going to give them a they're going to pay me a nice, they're going to pay me a very small fee of 400 trillion pounds. Insert laugh emojis in the chat.
Yeah, so again, I guess I have to go back to my original thought. Is this going to be with nice words, or how are you going to convince these guys to do that?
Oh, I'm going to slap them down a giant booklet of the 215 billion pounds that my country has paid into the project itself. That's net, not gross, which the Treasury has records of. I'm also slapping. Sorry.
Well, sorry to interrupt. I was just saying, look, Trump has somehow managed to get the NATO allies to start paying their bills that we have done nothing about in forever.
To be fair, in the UK's case, sorry to interrupt, we have paid our fair share.
Yeah.
I'm not saying you guys haven't, but other nations for sure haven't, especially Germany. And Germany it's not like they aren't a powerhouse within European economics, because they certainly are, or at least they
I
used
mean,
to be.
there are. I mean, I guess there. I mean, in the United States case, their argument is send thousands of troops to us and you pumped us full of money. So
Mm-hmm.
that'll be their argument. But yeah, so that's 215 billion pounds, 47 years worth of interest, inflation, and compensation on top. If I were to take the inflation aspect, 215 billion pounds, and that into the Bank of England's inflation calculator, that figure rises to around 2.7 trillion pounds.
Oh,
Which, as people who watched me the first time, inflation is an absolute bitch.
yeah. Yeah, last time you were on, we really went over the whole monetary policy and how it's kind of, you know,
Well,
I mean, it's fucking a lot of
like,
countries. All of us. I mean, we're kind of in the same boat in the United States with how.
Well, it's engineered though. It's meant to. I mean, I obviously you could say that's speculative on my part, but it really seems to be engineered, considering that everyone's on a fiat centralized bank system, and the
me,
economics of the day are all Keynesian, and they just think that we can do whatever we want. Like they gotta know that this doesn't work in the long run. Um, it's like Obamacare here in the United States was more or less engineered so people would want a single payer type system. Um, they didn't just do that out of nowhere and put in a system when they lied to everybody that raised everyone's health insurance except for people who couldn't buy health insurance, and created all these issues. Like they knew that that was going to help destroy the system even further, because the real approach would be to make it more free market. But
I
we
mean,
don't do that in the US. So
yeah, I mean, I've already had my healthcare in general, but anyway, yeah. So I skip and I take this giant fee, and I know some people in the comments thinking, "Where the hell did I come up with a fee like that?" And let's be frank, 400 trillion pounds is quite a very specific number.
So where did you come up with that number?
I took the inflation calculator, which I again said it was raised to around 2.7 trillion pounds.
Mm-hmm.
Then I added 47 years worth of interest on top of that.
Okay.
Then I'm also putting in compensation on top of that. So, for instance, compensation in regards to the whole shit with the fishing waters,
Right.
loss of industry, World War One, World War Two, etc., etc. I'm being just an absolute dick when it comes to finance and finding every little thing I can find. I basically can charge them repatriations.
Mm-hmm.
The
Okay.
reason why reason I have 400 trillion is because I can pocket myself 50 trillion, and I could call that agency fees. And then I turn back up to Parliament, slap down the new agreement, saying, right, I have secured 350 trillion pounds from the European Union. If anyone remembers the whole big red bus with the 350 million pounds thing, I could bring out a brand new big red bus saying, I have secured 350 trillion pounds from the European Union. Let's rebuild the country instead.
Yeah. Okay.
That's where I bring up the memes aspect. And let's be frank here, if I do turn up in the press say to me, so how much money have you secured? Yeah, I've secured 350 trillion pounds. So that makes me, sunglasses, world's first trillionaire. So CSI Miami right here.
are
Yeah.
you are you guys primarily still trading in pounds over there, or is
So we still have
was the
the
euro ever like a common currency in England or throughout the
no,
UK?
we never accepted the euro currency.
Okay, I
Okay.
didn't
It
think
was
so. I've never
no,
been to the UK though, so
no, we've always had the pound sterling. It's
all right.
there was talk about us joining the euro when it first came out in '99. Frankly, us and other members of the European Union were stupid enough to allow effectively Germany to control your currency.
Right. Well, then that puts you in a stronger position to be able to leave the union whenever you would like as well. I think
Exactly.
that's yeah, that's an underrated factor, is whoever controls the currency essentially has you by the balls. So,
Exactly.
yeah.
Exactly. And with that, and when I turn back, and this where it comes on to phase two of the plan, which is called the Great Rebuild. You could say the Great Reset in terms of the United Kingdom.
Okay.
First thing I'm doing straight away, I'm paying off that national debt.
Mhm.
We'll be the first debt-free country in the world. Second thing I'm doing, I'm getting the current governor of the Bank of England. I still think is Mark Carney, who's a Canadian guy who was in Canada's government when the financial recession happened. I'm giving him the boot. Installing someone that I like. For example, I could have because I know you can employ foreign people into this. I will have Glenn Jacobs as my current finance minister,
Mhm.
and there will be no printing of money. That will be completely abolished,
Okay.
along with quantitative easing. No more printing money.
Okay.
So,
Was
so you
so
would go to an actual note system then, I would assume,
we still have
or
notes, but what I'm saying is that the concept of printing money, quantitative easing, any
right,
way my country could liquidate the currency itself is being abolished. Ends
right.
now. Affecting my currency now is just going to slowly rise and rise and rise in terms of value.
Yeah, if I had to rewrite the American Constitution, that would probably be something that I would put in there very specifically. Um,
Yeah.
of course, we just ignored the whole part where legal tender is supposed to be gold and silver, but
Oh, I do
we
know
don't pay
in
attention
the
to that anymore. But yeah,
I
yeah,
do know in sorry to interrupt, but I know there's a section in the First Amendment which speaks about not control of money, but regulate the money itself, which basically says to make sure it's legal tender.
yeah. Well, that's not the First Amendment. It'd be section or Article 1, I would
That's, I think
assume.
it's Article 1. Yeah, that's sorry, my
Yeah,
mistake.
within
I
the
think it's Article
legislative
1.
branch.
I think it's Article. I think I forget. It was in the Glenn Jacobs video, which I recommended people check out. No, somewhere within it. But anyway, yeah. So that's the financial aspect, currency side. And when it comes to the great rebuild, obviously paying off the national debt is the first thing you should do. And we're officially debt free. And now I'm just gonna basically stash the money, endlessly investing, and buying out of companies. And the first place I should start is regarding to the telecommunications.
Mhm.
Now, me personally, I'm guess I've worked out in my head, providing if my country went all in on this, and I was effectively a quote unquote fascist dictator.
Mhm.
I used that term quite loosely, and was relentless in terms of the amount of building I was demanding. I think the entire rebuild will take me about 15 years.
Yeah. So you kind of see it as basically one generation away from being what it could be.
Yeah. Now,
Okay.
ultimately, that's. I'm being a little optimistic here. It'll perhaps be
Mm.
closer to 25 years.
Mhm.
Uh, what I'm effectively doing is trying to basically rebuild the country to the point where I could, quote unquote, future proof it. Because quite often with countries, especially the way technology goes on, you need to do major rebuilds every so many years.
Right.
So, for example, I'm pretty certain it's the case in the United States, but in the UK, we're still relying on stuff from the first industrial revolution,
Mhm.
which was over 200 years ago.
Like
So,
what kind of stuff are you relying on from that era?
like for instance, the old copper line telephone
Okay.
connections,
Yeah.
still relying on that. Still somewhat relying on the first industrial revolution sewer systems,
Mhm.
somewhat housing, roads, etc. We're still relying a lot on first industrial revolution, and in many aspects we haven't modernized or updated ourselves.
Mhm.
As if you look at a case of somewhere like Japan, ironically enough, Hiroshima Nagasaki bombs,
Mhm.
well, cities that were blown up by the two atomic bombs, they were actually blessings in disguise because it destroyed so much of the old infrastructure that they had to rebuild it to a modern standard.
Right.
Is why they were able to do so much of the modern stuff we could only dream of seeing.
Okay.
So yeah, so I'm talking like completely rebuilding the entire telecommunications infrastructure to have state of the art, top of the line fiber optic internet broadband connections.
Mhm.
And the sort of speeds I'm looking for, I just want to see any type of online update you could think of. It takes more time for you to press the button than it does to download.
Okay.
What's that? You got to download. What's that? You got to download a 200 gigabyte update. Press the button. Done.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, so like as far as internet connectivity right now, what are you guys working with? Or like how's it
I mean,
compared to like United States?
I think in the UK's case, we kind of got like a similar problem in the United States where certain cities do have fiber optic cabling.
Mm-hmm.
Many places are still reliant on old copper
Okay.
phone line systems. I'm basically saying, screw that, rip it all up, and we put everyone on effectively an equal playing field.
Okay.
So even if you're in the middle, even in a village in the middle of nowhere, you're still going to get state of the art internet.
Yeah, that sounds pretty dope. If you could pull, yeah. Well, I guess I guess that's kind of the equivalent of like if we want to do it in the United States, like if a particular state, you know, with the funds or whatever, could probably pull that off.
Yeah, I tend to, as effectively here, I'm saying that I've got more money, so I could do what the f I like with it.
Oh yeah, well that's
And
always
also,
good.
are the public going to say no, considering it's not their money I'm using here?
Right.
Exactly. So that's one major aspect I'm talking about. Second thing is heavily modernizing our energy infrastructure.
Mm-hmm.
Now, me personally, ultimately, I've had some opposition to this, but I would argue it's the best situation. Go all in on Gen 4 nuclear power.
Okay.
Now, reason for this is as I've read, does have the potential to potentially be able to run to become self-sufficient or running on nuclear waste. Now, if that is the case, you basically have actually quote unquote free energy.
Mm-hmm.
I use that term loosely.
Right.
Effectively, energy costs are so tiny that the heavy energy intensive industries are gonna love me. And who the hell doesn't want cheaper electricity?
Right.
Right. Do you guys have major restrictions right now on nuclear energy in the UK? Is that a big deal? I'm not aware.
We do have, for instance, nuclear research facility. In fact, there's one not too far away from where I live. But the thing is that we're not big on nuclear at the moment. We're heavily reliant.
I think you cut out there. What was that?
I don't know what's going on with Discord.
Yeah,
Uh, okay,
it cut out on me too. Okay, here we are.
yeah, that was weird. Hey, we're all back to normal. But anyway, as I was saying before, Discord rudely interrupted me. Yeah, Russia does supply large chunks of Europe, pretty much all of Europe, with huge amounts of gas. Now, what I want to do is go all in on the nuclear option because it's drastically cheaper compared to what we currently have, and also gives us that energy self-sufficiency. But also, I could use that if it's potential. If we could get it run on nuclear waste, it's actually a good. I could use that as a good bargaining tool to talk business with Putin, with Russia.
Mhm.
Yeah, well, being, independent energy is a big deal, I think, again, towards your national sovereignty. The more you have to rely on others, obviously, you're giving up, whether it's personal or national, you're giving up some sort of sovereignty. And I get it. We can't all do our own things. And it's going to depend on where we live. But the more independent you can be, I think the better.
Yeah,
Um, I asked about the nuclear thing because here in the US, we haven't built any nuclear power plants since the mid 70s due to environmentalism. But they
yeah,
also have continually across the United States shut down many of them. And it's very environmentally friendly and very cheap. And a lot of the hardcore environmentalists have gone toward nuclear because they realize that it's the only it's really the only sustainable energy source that we have that's clean. Now in the U.S. we have a lot of fracking now, so we have natural gas, and natural gas is a lot cleaner as well, and efficient. But we didn't really open that up until Trump. Obama was a little bit back and forth, but it frees
Yeah,
us as well. When we do it, it frees us from our, having to go to, let's say, not that we should, but the excuse to go to global wars against the Middle East and those kind of things.
yeah. Oh,
And of
yeah.
course, that
That's
creates
true.
problems with nations like Russia, who
Yeah.
who like their allies there that they can get natural gas and oil from and whatnot.
I mean, Russia's case, part of the reason it's still such a big global player, despite its reductions from the USSR days, is because it has such huge amount. They have what's known as the abundance of natural resource, which, ironically enough, hinders them economically speaking.
Hmm.
Contradictive as that may sound.
Well, I think we have the same in the U.S., except for we have all these wildlife protected areas. And I'm not necessarily fully against it, but due to basically Teddy Roosevelt back in the day, and then later on FDR expanded this some more, and then it's been expanded over the years uh, throughout, you know, the congressional history, where we have just larger and larger areas in the U.S. that are protected wildlife areas. You can actually buy homes near or around these areas in some areas in some states. Like here in West Virginia, there's some plots I was looking at that actually back up to these wildlife preserves, which is great if you don't want neighbors. In fact, a lot of congressmen and senators in the U.S. do this very thing, and then they make a little bill which expands all the land right around their house and property, so no one can build around them. But
I wonder why that is.
right, right.
Yeah,
But
but yeah.
that
So
a lot of that it gets business out of it, and our economic expansion and our ability to maybe sell energy to other nations as well. And again, I feel like it's always because of this. Well, we got to have global expansion. We can't have our own sovereignty. And I would
yeah,
say that, you know, that's the only thing that makes sense to me, at least.
that's true. Yeah, I mean, there
Yeah.
is a great tech talk by Michael Schallenberger, who was a big environmentalist who was anti-nuclear. In recent history, he's realized, after looking at the evidence, nuclear is actually great, but the so-called renewable energies, most specifically solar panels and wind, will not save the environment straight up. And in fact, they are, ironically enough, be doing major damage to the environment and wildlife itself. Which I'm not sure if you guys heard stories about old eagles being slaughtered by wind farms.
Yeah, and most people don't know too. There's also a large issue with solar panels, and that they actually lose a lot of energy. Um,
Yeah,
so
yeah.
obviously, to produce them, you have to mine the materials. There's just stuff there. There's cost there. It's not a perfect technology. Might get better, but
And they're
we
Oh
got to
yeah,
live with what we have.
and they're not
yeah.
they're not free from it still requires fossil fuels to make them and in the logistics process. So you're not really trading much there. You're kind of a wash at the end of the day. We were
Yeah.
talking about this before we started streaming, but yeah, have a pretty I'm kind of technologically skeptical of a lot of technology, but like
Yeah.
to kind of meet you guys in the middle, I do think that nuclear is probably the best thing that we can have right now. Even though I'm not fully on board with technology, period, I think nuclear is probably your best option if you're going to try to like
Yeah.
pull this out from the sewer.
Yeah, I mean, for me, the reason I went nuclear is, for instance, I use it because of geographical reasons. So, for
Mm-hmm.
instance, if you look at Iceland, almost all their energy is from geothermal sources,
Right.
which is
Right.
great. But not many places literally live on top of a volcano.
Mm-hmm.
You can move out to
That,
the Azores.
that's true, yeah. But for
Yeah.
instance, a good example of renewable energy in the United States, the Hoover Dam.
Mm-hmm.
Hoover Dam's great. Hydroelectric is amazing if you're in a geographical location which you can make it work.
Mm-hmm.
The problem is you have to have certain setup for certain elements to come together for it to happen, which is why I think nuclear is the best all cases scenario, best scenario when it comes to energy infrastructure. But yes, it has its problems. But if you look at countries like Switzerland, France, etc., they've
Mhm.
shown how much it works. And people talk about nuclear waste. People don't realize how tiny nuclear waste is when you
Mhm.
bring it up. Like in the TED talk, they're talking about Switzerland where they have a room, a pretty small room of all the containers of nuclear waste, and it's smaller. It's literally the size of a bedroom.
Yeah, you can something I've heard or seen. I could be wrong on this, but I'm pretty sure you can stack all the world's nuclear waste within like a football field. That is an American football field. 100 yards.
Similar, yeah, similar size to European English football, should I say?
Right,
Yeah,
right.
same size.
So,
It's not very big
um,
when in the grand scheme of things.
no, no, and I think another interesting thing that we could do if we went toward that is then develop other technologies experimentally and not have to worry about getting them out that actually work. We could do the research on them because
Oh,
windmills, yeah, they work when they
but
work,
yeah,
when there's
most.
wind blowing, but if there's no wind blowing, we don't have
Oh,
good efficient ways to store the energy. Uh,
it's don't interrupt, but it's funny you mentioned about wind is because in UK there was a big scandal regarding a lot of the wind farms. They have dirty generator backup, which kind of defeats the whole purpose. But then there's the problem of spinning too fast, they could overheat and they could literally cause a flame.
And
People
right.
say,
Well,
"Oh, yeah," which
and
actually did happen.
and the
you have to take
blade,
up land
yeah,
and whatever else to put them
Yeah,
in. There's all kinds of issues with them. Yeah, they're inefficient.
yeah.
yeah,
Well, yeah,
and the actual windmill turbine blades are not recyclable and
I
toxic.
was getting
Yeah,
to that.
yeah.
They're predominantly made out of fiberglass, and I've worked with
Mhm.
fiberglass. That's one of the worst material. It's one of the worst materials to work with, and I'll tell you this right now from a health perspective. Anyone who deals with fiberglass, make sure they go to a doctor because the resin can really screw with a person's senses, and it is known as a quote unquote legal high
Mm,
fiberglass resin.
mm.
Literally, you open a tub and you take a whiff, that blows your sense. That could quite literally blow your senses up.
Ooh, yeah.
Yes, but not just that, but that's why I say, and also another aspect of nuclear was great is when you think of how much power a nuclear plant can produce compared to its footprint in size, it's humongous because there's in the TED talk. If you look up the big solar farms like you see in California, they are huge. Whereas if you compare it to a power plant, you could get one the size, hell, one smaller than like a football field, and produce the same power, if not more.
Right. And that's the other thing that I mean, environmentalists never like anyone who's like there's different levels of environmentalists, but any lefty environmentalists, they don't really think things through or make a lot of sense because they're not seeing the other ecological impacts of laying out um, you know, hundreds and hundreds of miles or whatever it is of solar panels. And they want to believe that we can just have it on everyone's roof and all over the streets. And maybe we could do that, but
Yeah.
maybe that's going to be a long-term project that we can't just do
Oh,
overnight. And the things that we can do overnight are nuclear. Like,
yeah, I mean, sorry to interrupt, but solar panels on houses, perfect sense. No, I have no issues with that whatsoever.
right.
Producing giant ass solar farm, or to bring up an old YouTube meme, solar roadways, that's an incredibly stupid idea. But yes, but not just that with technology, but that's why I went all in on nuclear. Speaking of technology, that brings me on to a further point when it comes to international trade on a later point. Another aspect I got on the island is build a lot of homes. Now, I estimate the island based on housing demand, population, birth rates, etc. I estimate I got to build 5 million new homes. But I'm not talking tower block flats. As far as I'm concerned, tower block flats are not going to be built after the incident, after the Grenfell Towers incident, which I'm not sure if you guys heard about back in 2017.
No, I'm not aware.
Well, basically, there was a tower block which one floor caught fire. And thanks to the cladding on the outside, it basically burnt all the cladding, and basically everyone from a certain floor upwards basically couldn't escape and they died.
Well, I always, anytime I've seen like housing projects in the UK, I'm not saying I've
Yeah.
seen a ton of them, but anytime I've seen pictures or in a movie, they always remind me a lot of the old Soviet style um, public housing. I mean, they're not
I have seen the
very,
comparison. I have seen
huh?
the I have seen the comparison, and there is a lot of that. But
Yeah.
what I'm talking about is I'm not bothering with tower blocks whatsoever. Sure, they're nice, but the thing is, they're fucking ugly, and most people, and there is a known ecological effect tower block people living in tower blocks have on their minds.
Well, yeah, I mean, they had this problem it was an issue with ancient Rome where they built basically apartment complexes for people. It was a lot different because um you would get various smells and overcrowding and whatever else, but when you had fires and stuff, then it also, killed a lot of people. There's a lot of consequences to stacking a lot of people into a small space
Yeah.
versus allowing them to spread out. Now, for some
Yeah.
reason, people like to be herded in like cattle. I don't know why.
Yeah, I mean, there are a few people who do like the idea of a tower block, but generally
Yeah.
that's not the case. Now, the biggest issue I have is with a tower block. What's how do you effectively get rid of those people if, let's say, there's a fire on a certain floor? Everyone above that can't go down, so you got to find a way for them to escape above. Let's be frank here, no one has provided a solution. And that's why, me personally, I wouldn't commission any tower block building until someone comes up with a tangible solution to that problem.
Well, again, I just don't think it's a good way to live, generally speaking. I mean,
But
in New York, they have fire escapes. A lot of
yeah,
older cities have that. But then when you get into like modern construction, you don't usually see that. And the
uh,
big thing is they have their stairwells or elevators, but in a situation like let's say the 9/11 attacks with the twin towers, there were a lot of people who weren't able to get out because of the fires and um
exactly.
even with the original uh twin towers attack in the early 90s where they bombed the basement, like it wasn't nearly as bad of an issue, but it was still difficult for people to get out.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, that is true. But that's part of the reason why I'm against it, because I'm saying this from an engineering standpoint. When well, ultimately, I know this isn't, let's say, a subject for you two gentlemen, but for me, how I was taught, the field I would, you always have to, every time you start something, you're always along the way thinking of what could go wrong and how to prevent a problem. So if, let's say, if you take a top engineer, ask them to write a rule book, they write it very conservatively. Because as they're writing it, they're thinking of how could somebody find a loop as they're going along. Now, for me personally, when it comes to the housing problem, if I were to build 5 million new homes, I would go for quote unquote terrace or semi-detached sort of suburban style housing, because that's what a lot of people ultimately they want, that type of housing. The problem is that there's such a huge demand for housing and such a lack of building. I'm effectively going, okay, cool, let's have this house building revolution or expand on certain cities. Maybe there's a bit of gentrification, well, let's say northern cities, for instance. The main problem is building it into nice housing that people want to live in. Now, how the housing goes about, it's not going to be private. Basically, I'm funding the money. They're going to be quote unquote social housing or government housing. It's not good. Now, this obviously, I know you boys are big free marketers here. This is a case of This is a case of national capitalism. This is a case of my nationalism coming in. It's saying, right, these housings are going to be for citizens, like British English/British citizen. Okay, first, because one rule I'm definitely going to change is those without citizenship or settled status can't buy property in the United Kingdom. That is a big problem in places like London. They have those from Middle East or Russia buying out properties and then not even living in them.
yeah, well, there's a lot of that too, or with Chinese influence. We have a lot of that in the US where they buy properties, businesses, whatever. Um, I'm a free marketeer, but I definitely don't subscribe to protectionism, but I also think that in order to have free markets, really also have to have fair markets. So, um, and part of that fair market, in my mind, is just let your citizens have a leg up on things a little bit, right?
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, the housing market's utterly skewed over here. Now, what I'm effectively going to do here is these. What I would do as an idea. Ultimately, this isn't final. I've kind of gone back and forth on this idea. So basically, let's say someone applies for one of my houses, hypothetically, a citizen. Let's say you, Bill, you apply for one of my houses, hypothetically, right? You get the keys, you have a set rent, blah blah blah. Would you like the house? Just don't leave it a pigsty, of course. Let's say after 5 years, I can say, okay, then here's the keys. But, but there's a clause in the contract saying that if you try to sell it within 20 years of me giving you the keys, I take 75% of the money, of the price. It's basically me saying to the citizens, listen, it's an act of kindness. Don't try and bite my hand off.
Yeah, I'm not opposed to that because I just rented out if I wanted to move.
Yeah,
That's what I plan on doing with my place now.
we
Sorry.
we have that a little bit in the United States. Some people do what they call rent to own. So they'll pay rent on a house or whatever, and then after 5 years, they can say, okay, I want to buy it, and then all the rent they've paid for that house goes into a down payment, basically, with a little taken off the top for profit if you're ever selling it or whatever. So yeah, I mean, and a lot. My buddy did that. It's not the best way to buy a house over here. Like for instance, for me, like I put zero money down on my house, but I live in a rural. I live in a city. This isn't a very high demand area, so I was able to do that. But yeah, I mean, for me, not to get too off topic here, but for me, like housing is one of the biggest issues I think that really any country faces, and the more people you can get to own homes outside of renting and stacking each other on top, or even if you're gonna buy what's it called, townhouses or whatever in urban areas that are kind of stacked, that's important, and that's one of the best ways I feel like to get your citizens more upwardly mobile.
Yeah. I mean, like I said, this is elements where. Sorry to interrupt, Bill, again.
No, you're fine.
This is where this is where my nationalism comes in, which kind of contradicts the free market. Is that certain aspects of property when it comes to things like property of housing, I would argue there has to be some sort of government influence because you don't want to end up with places like California where housing's so outrageously expensive and you have a massive homeless problem.
But that's not the only reason why they have a homeless problem. A lot of people.
I used that as an example.
Right. No, look, man, I'm not trying to put words in your mouth. I'm just saying that's not the only reason. And but the big reason why the cost of housing is so expensive out there is because of the fiat money system and because that it's a sweet spot. It wasn't that way probably 30 or 40 years ago. I mean, 30 or 40 years ago, California was still red and they were still very sparsely dispersed. They had some cities. You could probably buy land in California for rather cheap in a lot of areas. And there becomes this thing where someone's like, oh, this is the sweet gig, this is the sweet spot. And then there becomes welfare and government subsidies. And I think that's why you get more of a collective in certain areas versus people that are free minded, that want to be off on their own. I kind of seen this in my own hometown of Maryland that I grew up in because it's a conservative area, but the town itself has been trying for years and years and years to get its downtown scene to be this like little market scene, and it can't do it. And the reason why is because it has a ton of government subsidies, Section 8 housing, and whatever else in the downtown area. And because of that, you get a lot of people who are drug addicts and criminals. And those people aren't good when you're trying to have, nice businesses. When people want to walk around town, they don't want to see a guy who's a little crazy or drugged out or whatever, homeless maybe even on the side of the street. No one wants to walk in those areas because you're just that's a natural inclination within human beings to go, that's a little dangerous. I don't know if I should be hanging out around here. And and then on top of that, we have other things like the historic societies, which is crazy. they're like, oh, you can't do this certain thing. You have to use this kind of certain thing, and people can't afford to do that. So you can't get entrepreneurs in. Like
Yeah,
I'm a big fan of renting personally, and I
also,
own my house now, but I'd always planned to maintain this home for whatever home I move to afterward and rent it out. And the reason why I'm a fan of renting is because I've always found good landlords, generally speaking, who will take care of the home. They're good people. They have good homes, and they're trying to help people out. The way I look at it, I'll probably rent my home out to someone who's young and coming up, and maybe in their 20s or early 30s, who are coming up throughout business, through some sort of business ties, job, whatever they have, and they'll have a good place to rent versus having to start off, move to this crappy spot. And that's another thing is a lot of landlords, they never invest in their homes and make their homes a
Hmm.
desirable place to rent. Where I might be able to rent for a couple $100 more than other places, I'm probably going to also get a better tenant in, and I'm also going to make sure that I have a uh, a pretty solid lease on my expectations of them and their expectations of me.
yeah,
So, you
that
know,
I mean, landlord culture here and is where I live because I live in an expensive city in the United Kingdom.
right.
Literally, trying to buy a house with most people's wages is just you've got no chance. And so many people on government subsidies. Well, my mentality in this system is to not necessarily deliberately screw over landlords here. But what I'm saying is to the inflated. Basically, I'm trying to, in a sense, indirectly force the housing markets to basically deflate itself.
Hmm.
Very
Right.
quote
No, I
unquote
understand that.
inferior
I
option.
understand that. I mean,
It's
I agree with you. More people need to be owning their own homes than renting, generally speaking. I just think that we should be clear about, renting has its place. Um,
of course. I'm not
I
gonna
don't
abolish
I
it.
don't think I mean I definitely don't think people should be stacked in apartment buildings and apartment complexes. I think it's not a natural thing. I think it makes you more of a caged animal than it does a free man. So
Exactly, yeah. So, like I said, was like an idea, as in, like, this was like a, I guess you could say, let's say, a blueprint. And obviously, there's some. What I'm saying is, let's say for you, but like I said, I used you as an example,
yeah.
is that you have a rent. Let's say there's a 5 year quote unquote trial period, and you have the option, if you want to have the keys. Here's the keys. It's officially yours, without a quote unquote payment. The clauses is that, let's say people out there who try and take advantage of the thing, I'm still going to win either way because I'm going to take the majority of the profit itself. So it's basically me saying to you, look, I've been kind enough to give you something you've ultimately desired. Don't spit it in my face. That's,
Yeah, I mean yeah, boundaries, man. I mean, that's kind of the
yeah,
way I feel about renting my house out. It's like and I've had people live here before, and I've had to kick somebody out as well. Like I had a roommate that I let live here, and signed a lease agreement and all that stuff, and I had to kick her out because it just was not going to work due to stuff that she was doing. I was like, "Yep, you're gone. Sorry, get your stuff, get out."
exactly, yeah. So obviously that's housing. Now, in terms of the economical aspect, I personally disagree. I would be buying out certain industries, most specifically the automotive industry. And and before anyone says in the comments, "Oh, you're trying to be a national socialist or whatever," no, what this is national capitalism. It's completely different. What I want to do is take all the big British manufacturers, Aston Martin, Jaguar, Land Rover, Mini, Rolls Royce, etc., and effectively do what they do in Volkswagen and General Motors, is basically put them all under one roof. So they're all still individual companies, but they all share effectively. They all basically share a lot of aspects within it. There's lots of standardized parts. Effectively modern all our but basically modernize all the factories, etc. Because I'm going to buy them out from the companies. I'm not going to be a communist and take them from them by force. I'm going to buy them out and say, right, this right. You're under new ownership. This is how it's going to be, and basically modernize it and restructure it so all these individual companies can drastically increase their performance. And basically, now this is where, say, you guys as an Americans and others in Europe are going to get annoyed with me. This UK slice of the pie of the automotive sector, I'm now going to compete effectively and try and take a bigger piece.
No, I totally understand that. It's actually kind of weird that in the United States we see a lot of American manufacturers, obviously Chevy, Ford, and such, and
Yeah.
then we see Japanese Honda, Toyota, all that stuff, but we really don't see um, like British cars in
Yeah.
America that much. I can't think of a single. I mean, I see Jaguar every once in a while, and I
You see
see
minis.
yeah,
Mini
I
Coopers
see
are,
minis,
yeah.
Yeah,
but
minis are quite big over
yeah,
there. I do know.
Yeah.
but really like I see far more Toyota Corollas than I see anywhere close to you
Yeah.
know English manufacturing. And you guys make pretty good cars, so it's kind of strange, I guess, that we
Well,
don't see more.
part of the reason is partly due to the taxes, import taxes between Europe and the United States. So, for instance, if the US were to import, if you were to the US were to sell a car in terms of, let's say, United Kingdom,
Mm-hmm.
pay an import tax, let's say around 50 or so percent. But the thing is, because a car over there is much cheaper to make, it's not. It doesn't become suddenly vastly more expensive compared to what, let's say, you could buy in the United Kingdom.
Right.
As if, whereas with it being the other way around, let's say a Jaguar becomes vastly more expensive. Let's say what you could buy, for instance, a Lincoln. Then you think, why am I paying potentially twice the price for basically very similar cars?
Mm-hmm. It's kind of weird though, because in the United States, I don't know, Bill, you can chime in on this a little bit too. Like if you was to buy an American made car, like say I don't know, like a Ford Taurus or something, it's gonna be about the same price. I feel like as a like Honda Civic or something similar. Do you think so?
Yeah, generally speaking, but here's the thing. What I was about to say is most of the American car industry is crap anyways.
That's true.
Ford
Yeah.
had Ford had to rebuild itself and they did. But Ford is also
Uh,
part of Aston Martin, if I'm not
uh,
mistaken.
Actually, correction. Sorry to interrupt. In Ford's case, they did update themselves. Weren't fucked by the recession like General Motors was.
Mm-hmm.
It was
Yeah.
safe because they had strong presence in Europe, America,
Okay.
and Asia. But Ford did back in the '90s own Jaguar, Land Rover, and Aston Martin.
Oh,
Back in the
okay.
'90s, when
Okay.
'89s when they was that was because of Thatcher, the cunt, French.
Well,
She sold them off. She sold off all the manufacturers off, basically.
well, right. And what I was saying is that
Yeah,
that tie with them is when they started reinventing their engines and such, and they got to be a better, more reliable vehicle.
yeah,
GM's not really that great of a car
Yeah.
company. You could argue for like Dodge, like trucks and stuff. I would say we have Jeep, but a lot of the General Motors, generally all their different sub brands and whatever, not that great. And so at the
yeah,
time, I think in the set of the 70s, the Japanese and Korean cars kind of became a thing. And Hyundai uh, being one of the companies. Obviously, there were some other brands. Who runs Saab? I know it's Scandinavian. I can't remember what.
Saab are defunct. They used to be owned by General Motors many years ago. Actually, they were owned by General Motors up until like, the last few years of the company's history. But going back to your point, well, in the United States' case, back in the era, the Motown era, '60s, 97% of cars that were sold in America were made in America,
Yeah. Yeah.
and
For
they were
sure.
almost all of them made in Detroit.
Well,
Mm-hmm.
a lot of the cars are. Well, that's kind of the bigger thing I was getting to is
Yeah,
that there are all these different cars, but for me, generally speaking, a lot of our cars are made in America, but they're Asian cars or I'm
yeah.
not sure if the German cars that we drive are made in America, but
Uh, but to interrupt,
a lot of the Japanese cars are. A lot of the
yeah,
Korean cars are. But
I,
that is basically the market here in the US. You
yeah,
either have a German car or you have a Japanese car or you have a
yeah.
crappy American car.
Well,
So,
I mean, in defense of General Motors, after the recession, Motors brands did generally step up. They did step up in quality. I will say that right now as
yeah,
an
yeah.
Englishman. But also, in terms of the America's case, I do know with BMW, for instance, any big SUV, for instance the X5, almost all of them are made in America because that's the main market.
Yeah.
Quite a lot of brands if there's a specific car for a specific market, they will
Mm-hmm.
make it in the country rather than make it at home and then send it on a ship because it actually works out cheaper. It works out cheaper to do it to make it in the host country in question, which is what a lot of Japanese companies did back in the 70s when we put import tariffs on it. They
Mm-hmm.
just did deals with British companies throughout the British Leyland era. And we basically created their cars over here.
Mm-hmm.
But my mentality with the almost, I won't say it's that the British manufacturers, I would say, are technically nationalized in the traditional sense. What I'm saying is I brought them out and they're going to run like private companies, but instead of going to, let's say, a board of directors, profits, and shareholders, it's going straight to the treasury.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you think like big manufacturers, especially with Detroit, and the big manufacturers all pulled out after 1970, had a huge amount of people who are unemployed, and that just caused it to become a crime-ridden city.
Oh yeah, Detroit's a god awful. I mean, I think it was a couple of years ago. You could buy a house in Detroit for like $500 or something. It was,
Exactly.
yeah. I mean, it went to shit real quick.
Well, a lot of that has to do with labor unions
Yeah.
and other stuff as well. I mean, there's a
Oh yeah.
ton of stuff there that has to do with corruption within the government, has to do with democratic control for decades.
Exactly.
And then, eh, well, the thing is, if you don't have a free market,
Yeah, of
and
course. Yeah.
right, and the more you unionize, the more you have democratic control of things, the worse things are going to become. It's interesting because in a way, even though they are free market-ish or a freer market, the mixed economy, if you would, in a
Yeah.
way, what they do is they end up creating the Soviet Union in the US, and you can see it. If you go to
Oh
Detroit,
yeah, for
you
sure.
can
For
you
sure.
can freaking see it. It's bad.
Oh yeah,
You
for
know,
sure. For sure. But
the same
like,
with Baltimore, man. Baltimore, I can drive to Baltimore and get there in a little bit
I've
over an
seen
hour, and it's
I've
ridiculous.
seen lady who did the campaign thing. Candace, oh, I forget the lady who did the Savage uh campaign video. Who was running for Congress. What was her name?
Oh,
Oh.
Kimberly Klasick.
That's it, Kimberly Clayton. Like
Yeah,
that was a
yeah.
Savage, and you just see the cities. They're similar to like a lot of northern mining towns. You just see destroyed buildings, and you just think to yourself, Jesus. And like what a lot of people don't understand, it's not just in the United States; it's also a UK thing. Those cities were big industrial hubs. Once that industry goes, the place becomes a ghost town. So that's why I have to. That's why I'm posing a sort of national capitalist mentality. Is that I've got to rebuild my country. I've got to give these areas something that they. I won't say give. Perhaps gives the wrong. But I got to reignite the fire that made those places such huge hubs to begin with.
Right, and we see that when you have a economy that's based on the locale and you deplete all the resources. We have examples of that in the U.S. with our gold rush and such. There are tons of towns throughout the West that were gold mining towns that dried up immediately when the gold was gone, and they're ghost towns now. In fact, there's a guy on YouTube. I can't recall his name, but I follow him. I watch the videos every now and again. He actually bought an old ghost town. It's like a full on mining town out in the mountains of California, and completely empty. And there's all these old buildings there. No one's lived there since like the 1920s.
Exactly, this is my point, and this is where I did say elements of what I'm talking about with the house building project. There will be elements of gentrification, but with the economy itself, with industry, I'm effectively trying to make it. I mean, I know this is going to areas of government planning. The idea is to try and make it as least try not to make it London centric as it is right now, like the city of London and service economy. I want to put much more emphasis on manufacturing across the entire country itself, diversify it.
Right. Well, and gentrification is this like loaded term that people think is bad, and I don't really. Well, again, I on All Minus One, I did a video on gentrification, looking at some of the studies talking about it. Again, I do what I usually do. It's a brief gloss over, but it's more like an idea. Hey, point you in this direction. Go do the research yourself. I'm not
Yeah,
here to do all
hell
the
yeah,
fishing for you, bud, but I'll teach you how to fish, that kind of thing.
yeah,
And the reality is that very few people are displaced as far as the minorities or whatever else, the poor. Most of those people actually just get richer living in those
Mm-hmm.
neighborhoods. The people that do get displaced are probably criminal elements or just people who were never going to pay their bills in the first place because, well, just let's face it, folks. There's just people out there in the world who are just, turds, and they're not going to do the basic things to survive. A lot of them are communists.
Oh, yeah, yeah. But the idea is effectively, it's like for instance, let's say take the North for example, big mining town, and a lot of it was industrial powerhouses building giant ships. Well, I kind of want to bring back the mentality, but also modernize it in a sense. Because one thing
Right.
I would like to build in, let's say Yorkshire, I want to build, for instance, the largest carbon fiber mass manufacturing industry in the world.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I know that sounds utterly bonkers, but the reason for that is carbon fiber is a material which doesn't have a big manufacturing field across the world. You have like pockets, let's say in the UK, pockets in the United States, pockets in Japan, etc. What I want to do is build a giant nucleus, almost kind of quote unquote monopolizing the industry in a sense in my favor, quote unquote. That's where the filthy national capitalism comes into it. But just be a giant hub of industry, and to say to people at the North who've been shafted for 40 years, effectively, say to them, right, it's a giant hub, make it great. You need training, cool. It's all paid for, because this is where I bring in Motors Alley, who are big in where I live. I'm basically right in the middle of it. We've got 40 or so thousand of the highest technical graduates in terms of engineering, design, etc. I invite them all into a room, like a big meeting. I say, right, I want to build this industry. You people are going to be key to that. Here's a load of money. Go ahead and do it. These people, they're ruthless in terms of standards, and they'll take on anyone. And to give you an example how powerful Motorsport Valley is in the United Kingdom, if you took the best from the United States, the best from Japan, the best from Europe, made an all-star team, if you look at it in sporting terms, take on the British, it would still lose.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that sounds ridiculous, but that's how powerful Motorsport Valley is. Even the blood nationalist types of the Italians, they still use British stuff.
Right.
As they call it, it is a deal with the devil, as they like to call it.
Yeah, if I'm not, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I was under the impression that historically British steelworks, specifically steel, has been, some of the best in the world.
Yeah, it was. It was at the time.
Yeah, so much that Judas Priest named one of their albums British Steel. Yeah. So I mean, I think historically Britain has been a pretty big player in the engineering game. That's actually why I kind of got surprised when we were talking about automotives, and I just realized I don't see that many British automobiles in the United States. It's interesting to see that.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
the UK was one of basically the birthplace of the Industrial Revolution.
Yeah, for sure.
America followed shortly after. Other nations did as well, but they really were the innovators and all that. And yeah, it's interesting to see. There used to be a term that you don't hear much anymore, the fleecing of America. And the idea that we were outsourcing so much and everything to bring the rest of the world up, which again, I'm not against bringing the rest of the world up, but you got to take care of your house first, man. Like you got to make sure your people are doing well. You got to make sure you have infrastructure. And that's a big conversation now in the US where years ago people would bring it up and it's just kind of ignored. And I'm sure it's probably similar in the UK. It's like, hey, can we get back to business here? Do we
Oh,
do we need to quit,
yeah.
propping up these other nations? Can they do this on their own?
Oh, a lot of those, let's say, the right leading, especially the more nationalist thinking types in terms of the economy, they want to basically, if they can, build almost everything here if they wish. Because that used to be the case. Same thing in America. Everything you brought from the store was made in your country. Anything in the United Kingdom. Then with the expansion of globalization after the 60s, we basically sent everything to the rest of the world to save a buck. In reality, in many aspects, it ended up becoming an even bigger financial burden in terms of welfare and the taxpayer.
Right. Well, the libertarian argument's simple and it does make sense economically, and that is it allows the average person to buy a cheaper product. The problem is, if the person doesn't have the wealth, the means to buy said product from around the world, it doesn't really matter. And then on top of that, you have to have some sort of commerce, some sort of industry within your own nation. The United States itself has become heavily a service industry. And frankly,
UK.
services do not take a lot of skills, but they
Mhm.
also, so that means a lot of people can get jobs in them. But at the same time, they also generally, they don't pay as well. They don't pay as well as highly skilled work.
I mean, in the UK, we have what is known as the City of London, and it's quite literally like a mini New York with the
Right.
infrastructure and stuff. And it's literally like almost like a little tax haven, and that's where all the big banking industry is basically set in. I mean,
Mhm.
literally, if you're dealing with England in terms of banking, you're dealing with the City of London, which was a big talking point with Brexit talks. And quite literally, a lot of the banking industry is not going to pack up and leave because to be able to rebuild that across multiple European countries is going to cost too much money and too much time.
Mhm.
The Bank of England's right here. Thanks. I mean, this is technically a byproduct of Thatcher, but the problem is it made the economy itself too London centric.
Mhm.
And this is where decentralization is much better for the economy because if you make something too central in one spot, you end up effectively killing off basically the rest of your country. So in a sense, yeah, you have this great upturn, but the thing is, you have so many downturns everywhere else. You're not effectively really gaining anything out of it.
Right, and this is generally an argument of diversification, and not in the sense of ethnicity or anything like that. But
Yes.
if you over centralize things, you're not diverse enough, then there's more to fail. If you're very diverse in numerous ways, one thing might fail, but you have something else to pick you up and carry you on.
Yeah.
Um,
Which and from what I found, especially in the last 40 years, countries which are very heavily manufacturing based tend to do the best in terms of economic growth, but also in terms of economic sustainability whenever wherever there is economic issues. For example, if I were to do a blueprint of how I want my island to be by the time I'm done with it, I want it to have the manufacturing capability, manufacture powers of a Germany and Japan combined. Well, let's say a Germany and a Japan, the technological advancements and revolutionariness of a Japan, the military power of the United States, the financial resources of UAE with the GDP and GDP per capita of a Switzerland.
Yeah, that would definitely change the global outlook if that was the England we were looking at today for sure.
Yeah, but I'm saying that as like as like what I'd like to see, and this is why I would like for instance the British manufacturing. One thing I would do, I have to make a small trip to Sweden to speak with a certain bald-headed man about buying two particular technologies he's got, which is going to revolutionize the automotive
Mm.
industry. Obviously, I'm being a filthy capitalist here, a filthy capitalist pig, and buying out technology. And with a specialist I got here, it's
Mm.
an engine specialist. Uh, I'm basically going to let them go ham and say, "Here, boys, look at this technology I've just brought. Go ham, show me what you can do with it." I'm almost like I guess you could say, like the good uncle who's got all this money to the kids, saying, "Here, kids, look what uncle got you. Go ham,
Mm.
show me what you can do with it."
Mm.
In a sense, yeah. So, and so with the internet, but also I want to build that giant carbon fiber manufacturing industry because carbon fiber as a material, it's not it's not massively built in any parts of the world. I want to build that nucleus there so I could go all in on the carbon fiber manufacturing, giving me a massive competitive advantage to all my rivals in Europe.
Mhm.
But also, I guess to go on from that, we should talk about trade.
Yeah, go ahead.
Now, obviously, there's going to be part of the deals with registration is effectively now the EU is effectively under my boot. So technically, all the trade deals where say European Union has with likes of Japan, etc., still stay in place. I put my own little tweaks on certain aspects, which I like and what I don't like. Also, let's say trade talks in America. One thing I was going to talk about, let's say the National Health Service in the United Kingdom. I do want to heavily restructure that in a sense where it's a very fat. It's very middle fat in terms of its infrastructure. So it's like a reverse hourglass. What I want to do is decentralize it to make it a very bottom heavy system. Also put tons of money into drug production and research, bionic limb research, but also expand physiotherapy research facilities as well. And this will be partly when I talk to Trump, where you're getting screwed by Big Pharma. I could go to Trump and say, listen, Trump, I'm building a giant drugs laboratory and I could sell you the drugs at a cheaper price than what Big Pharma are giving you.
Mm-hmm.
But that's a good talking point when it comes to trade.
Oh yeah, for sure. So I'm not very familiar with the England's healthcare system.
Yeah.
So, I get
A
okay.
socialist paradise. That's what it is.
Well, not. I don't want to derail too much, but let me just kind of lay out what way I look at United States healthcare. So, there's a lot of debate about United States healthcare system. I give virtually no shits whatsoever about what kind of healthcare system the United States wants to put in place, whether it be nationalized or socialized or whatever we got now. My issue is that most of the people in the United States are suffering from non-communicable diseases, mainly cardiovascular problems and type 2 diabetes. All that can be changed with diet. It requires no change to your healthcare system.
Absolutely.
We're sick from shit that we bring onto ourselves, which is it's a whole different topic, whatever. But so kind of
it's similar to UK as well.
Okay, yeah, that's what I was going to ask. Is what kind of issue? When I talk to people about healthcare, my first question is, why do you need it? I haven't been to the doctor in I don't know what 4 years or so. So
same here. Like,
yeah. So
anytime I go to doctors is sorry to interrupt. Is literally just for them to update their records.
Yeah. So barring like cancer or something, I'm not worried about it. So yeah, can you kind of tell us what the health status of United Kingdom is, or England?
Well, let me add on to that real
Yes,
quick
sorry.
there, Tank. And that like these problems that we see in the United States and the UK are also issues in Canada,
Mhm.
Australia, New Zealand, and
Okay.
they've spread to the rest of Europe.
Okay.
So it seems to be a product, in my mind, of materialism, luxury, and excess, and also government manipulation of
Mhm.
let's say diet incorrect dietary information. Because if you go into Eastern Europe, you don't have these problems. They
Right.
don't they don't
Yeah.
get
That's
into things
true.
like that. But in any
That
case,
is
go
true.
ahead, Kiz.
Yeah, so obviously in the United Kingdom we have what is known as the NHS, which was founded right after World War II. And the reason it was founded was because right after the war you had so many soldiers like with blown limbs, like stuff like that, suffering from various diseases. It made sense at the time to have basically an all-encompassing healthcare system to treat such a such a distinct portion of the population who are suffering from various injuries. Problem was, as time went on, it didn't modernize and adapt to what was required from the nation itself. What I'm trying to do is to make it a very bottom heavy system, as in you have tons of labor within the healthcare service itself. So you have tons of doctors, nurses, surgeons, etc. Basically, effectively have as little management as possible, but also go absolute overkill in terms of equipment, like PPE, and have state of the art facilities, etc. I'm basically set up in the sense that ideally I don't want you to go to the hospital. If you have to, we can get you done very quickly.
No, yeah, that's
So,
that's kind of the opposite of what we have here now. Is that here's an issue that could be fixed with diet and exercise that we're going to prescribe a pill for the rest of your life.
exactly.
It's really we talked about this last week, I believe, me and Bill on our show, about how absolutely fucked up American healthcare is. Not even healthcare per se; it's more of just health in general. And we've got government agencies telling us to eat the wrong things to make sure that we stay sick. If you want to get conspiratorial about it.
Oh yeah. I mean, let's just say if you eat crap, you feel crap.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, but not just that, but going on to my early extra point, that's how I want to restructure it,
Right.
make it very bottom heavy.
Mm-hmm.
But if you have an issue, you're not waiting, for instance, how many hours to get seen. You're basically seen as soon as you get there. Because,
Right.
for instance, this is common with universal systems. I'm using that with very big quotation marks. There's major issues with waiting times
Mm-hmm.
when it comes to surgeries and cancer treatment. What I'm effectively saying is, I don't give a damn what it is, you're getting seen effectively straight away.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I can tell you it's from working in the system, it's always a matter of doctors, nurses, and beds and those things available. When you have a socialized system, it's obviously going to become far worse because you don't have the intrinsic like market saying, okay, we need this many beds or we need this or that. You have someone up on high. In America, we actually have this weird mix of market and socialist system, and people
Uh,
never want to acknowledge the socialist side of things.
Oh no, no, I am aware of it myself, but sorry,
Yeah.
go ahead.
Well, no, I'm just saying, like, they
Yeah,
never want to acknowledge in America, like, for instance, in Maryland, they have a little board that's down in Annapolis of 12 guys that dictate all the healthcare procedures, where the hospitals can have this or that or another thing. They have these protectionisms. So in my area, they were building a new hospital. They were talking about having open heart. They said, nope, we have open heart in Cumberland and we have it in Baltimore. We don't need it here. And those are towns an hour away from the town I was in Hagerstown. And the interesting thing is that that would of course lower cost because if someone gets in or has an issue in the hospital there in that area, then they have to fly a helicopter, which costs like $20,000 for this 20-minute flight to go down to Baltimore so someone can have open heart surgery.
yeah,
So it
that yeah,
doesn't incentivize anything. All it does is it creates protectionism. It limits the amount of people who might be able to get into open heart, have a
yeah,
job, be surgeons, that kind of stuff,
yeah.
and so forth.
Yeah, that is
So
yeah, I could definitely see that. Whereas, like, I did sit when I've spoken to Americans about their healthcare system. What it sounds to me like, the way it's set up, it sounds like in a way an inferior version to what the French have, as they have, let's say, a hybrid of private healthcare as well as public healthcare, and they basically share responsibility between them.
well, as far as like private
Yeah.
versus public options go, I think the Swiss probably have the best model because
Well, yeah,
they
yeah,
have public basic healthcare, like
yeah,
doctor's visits, that kind of stuff.
yeah,
And then once you go up the line, it's all private. It's all
yeah, yeah.
privatized.
Well,
So,
with the French, it's a hybrid system. The thing is, though, is that you could choose if you want to go public or private for various things. That's the thing. You do have that element of choice. As in the UK, you do have public healthcare, but here's the thing: private healthcare. Sorry. The thing is, if you want to see a doctor, you don't go to private sector. The private sector is not interested in doctors. They deal with surgeries and stuff like that. So what I'm talking about is basically trying to remove all the bureaucracy from it and make it very highly efficient in its model. But like you said regarding the issues of, let's say, open heart surgery in that one case, I want to basically have it set up so every single hospital can do every sort of operation, regardless of where you are in the country.
yeah, and this is really a common thing people don't know about is that there are these restrictions. We have restrictions on insurance. Now, I'm not a big fan of having to pay for healthcare through insurance. I think that's like insurance should be what it is, just in case,
Yeah,
for the emergency type things. The reason why healthcare got implemented, went on a direction it was going on in the US is because essentially we went on a fiat currency, inflation went up, healthcare costs started going up, and then they attached it to employers. And once that really solidified the use of insurance, instead of just going to your doctor and paying out of pocket, um, the whole industry, everything just skyrocketed. There's the big farm side of it, but each state has their own rules. Sometimes you can't trade across state lines for different insurances, which means there's no market for insurance. There's a huge insurance market for vehicular insurance in the US, and you can get vehicular insurance from any state, any place you want. And it's lowered rates, but you can't do that with healthcare. Certain states require you to have particular kinds of coverage. And then over half of our federal budget goes to the combination of Social Security and Medicare. And it's absolutely insane. That's half of our federal budget. That's driving a huge amount of our national debt. And if Medicare for All was this great program that's supposed to save everybody, then why is it like a quarter of our national budget, of the federal budget? Like, how would that not make things worse? How would not that bring on hyperinflation into the United States? These lefties, they haven't thought these things through very well. There was actually a study done in Vermont a while back on this, if they went to Medicare for All just for the state, and it was going to raise everyone's taxes to about 50%, which is about what they pay in Canada, by the way. And the Canadians come to the US to get private health care. So, oh, it says,
Did we lose him? We lost him.
Kiz, just go ahead and like disconnect and reconnect, man. We lost Kizza there with his mic. Technical difficulties over and over
Right,
again.
right. I'm back. Sorry about that, guys.
No
Yeah.
worries.
So yeah. So as I was gonna say, obviously with my NHS, I obviously know exactly what you're talking about with the issues of stuff like Obamacare, bureaucracy, waiting times, and so on and so forth. And I just want to strip away all of that. So effectively, I have basically the most efficient healthcare system in the world, because I have spoken to people worked in the UK and the United States, and they do prefer the US model. It's just a case of, can you get here? You need something, can you get here? Yes. Can you afford it? Yes. Here you go. But also, like another thing which a lot of people don't talk about in terms of US healthcare is United States quite literally funds the last chunk of drug research and drug production, which all of us in Europe rely on. That's partly why your healthcare, your GDP for health costs is very high, along with the fact which a lot of people in the United States don't think about compared to Europe. In Europe, we don't have to do. Very rare do you see a doctor have to deal with a bullet wound, for instance. UK, yes, let's say in London, you have people who experience dealing with knife wounds, but most European doctors have never dealt with a bullet wound, which is a very expensive issue in terms of US healthcare. For instance, the amount, also United States, huge amount of obesity that causes major costs on healthcare. Stuff like that. It's no wonder United States healthcare is so expensive. Like, just generally, if the country got fitter, slimmed down, there wasn't so much murder in certain places, your healthcare costs in general would be similar to what it is in most European countries.
Yeah, that's kind of, I'm in between, like, a lot of the, like, libertarian guys and stuff that I talk to. I'm like, look, if our healthcare system was only treating kids with cancer and like other things that people can't control, most people wouldn't have a problem with any kind of like socialized healthcare. Our issue is that we're treating a lot of diseases that can be avoided. And the thing about it, we kind of talked about on the last show, is that a lot of the issues that the United States healthcare has is that we have a government organization that tells us the wrong shit to eat. If you look at the food the food pyramid, like you got people that are type 2 diabetic going on low carbohydrate diets and reversing their diabetes, going completely off insulin. Whereas our, what the experts say is that,
I love that word.
Yeah, what they say is, oh, they tell type 2 diabetics that they should be eating 60 grams of carbs per meal, and then of course taking insulin 3 times a day or whatever it is.
Oh no, well, yeah, it's just ridiculous, and you do need to get on top of this diet aspect, because I know it sounds simple. You feel crap. That is quite literally happen.
Yeah,
if you look at all the people who are in shape, you see their meals, you see how clean it is.
Mm-hmm.
Another place to maybe look at is Singapore. I brought up here just their healthcare services, and they have a mix of public and private. It says healthcare institutions can be divided into public and private hospitals and healthcare providers. All hospitals in Singapore have been structured as a government corporation since the 1990s, constantly competing with one another to have the most advanced services and technology available. And it says there are multiple spheres and levels to both public and private uh, streams. And I
Yeah.
think, though, as reading that little excerpt there, this is just from a wiki page, but
Yeah.
the competition's the important part. And usually, what you get when you get government run things is a lack of competition. The government is the
Exactly. Yeah.
ultimate monopoly.
But yeah, that's my point though. What I'm saying is, if you're gonna have a national health service, you gotta treat it like a private corporation in a sense, and it's gotta be you gotta be utterly ruthless in terms of the efficiency aspect. Which because for instance, another thing which I'm gonna get onto now is, for instance, transportation. In the UK, when it comes to trains, what we have, the biggest problem we have is we have a bunch of mini monopolies. For instance, if you wanted to go to one section of the country, only one train company offers the services in that section. It's kind of similar to cable TV in the United States. Depending on you live, you may only get one provider. It's that lack of competition. Before that, we had what was known as British Rail, which was terrible, and there was an ongoing joke saying there's nothing more not on there's things that are more or less things that are not on time, and that is British Rail. It was a running joke.
Yeah.
At the point even American media were making fun of British Rail. Me personally, not to say again all in favor of government control, but I do feel there are certain elements within the country and the economy the government does need to have a strong hold of. For instance, if I were to, let's say, United States, government does need a good strong hand when it comes to Silicon Valley, because that is such a monopoly of what it is that the government's kind of got to have some involvement in there. Because we all know what private corporations are like. As a friend of mine liked to say, private corporations are like children. Show them no boundaries, they'll cause absolute chaos.
Well, you know what? They're creating and they've done this with the healthcare system too, but Silicon
Yeah,
Valley, they're creating a guild system's what they're doing. So
yeah,
Silicon Valley has different companies. You can't call them monopolies per se, but when they all get together, sit in the same room, make up the same rules, and decide who they're going to censor, what messages they're going to point out, what messages they're going to put out into the ether, what president they decide who's going to be the president. Is it going to be Joe Biden or Donald Trump? Well, if Silicon Valley has their way, it'll be Joe Biden. I fortunately believe the American people are a little bit smarter, but the government, you're absolutely right, needs to be like, hey guys, like if we're going to preserve liberty and freedom, there becomes a point where you have to say, do these companies get to violate your liberty and freedom because they have so much power? Are they going to be more powerful than the government itself? So I don't think
yeah.
it's antithetical in any way to any of my beliefs to say, well, yeah, we need to do something about these private entities who are actually exerting more control, more power than the government, because the government's job itself is to protect your liberties. Like that's
Yeah.
the only legitimate use of government to my mind.
Exactly, exactly. And
Yeah.
as people bring up the sort of liberals, English liberal / libertarian mentality, you think of it back then, private industry did not hold a candle to the amount of finance and power as they do today.
No, absolutely not. Yeah. Yeah.
But this is what people don't understand is private corporations, especially Silicon Valley, they're richer than the vast majority of countries. Like I said, California by itself is richer than literally the it's literally as rich as a country as rich as the United Kingdom. It's one
Well,
state.
right. And we're talking about this playing out of things that many fiction writers saw coming in this cyberpunk genre, where the corporations would essentially outpace the governments. Now there's certain people that think cyberpunk was talking about we should be going towards socialism, which I think is just stupid, because you're just going to have more, in the end you're going to have more corporatisms the way it's going to work.
That's
But
why. Sorry, good.
well, yeah, I'm just saying, like
Yeah,
this has been foresaw since the 1960s. And what we really have is we, at least in the West and especially in the US, we just have the government in bed with these corporations, allowing them to be propped up and to be more powerful. And
Yeah,
it's that little corporate oligarchy thing, you know?
exactly. And this is where I get a bit of flack from, let's say, those of the English libertarian aspect. It's like there is a distinct role for government. Here's the problem. Yes, I don't like big government. It's the problem. You got to have a government powerful enough to deal with, let's say, a giant corporation. They gotta have that ability. Let's be frank here. Can you imagine if Silicon Valley went the way they're going? If you were to be an accelerationist, just let them go all out and censor anyone they didn't like, well then you're screwed. Then imagine if companies went as far as saying you talk about something that a phone company doesn't like and they cut your phone line.
Right. Well, that's the same reason why I've had the argument that the Section 230 in the United States Federal Communications Act needs to be amended for the big tech companies, because we're talking about a public square now. And we see this very specifically just this past week with the stuff dropped with Hunter Biden, and that Twitter banned, at least for a day or so, Kayleigh McEnany, or whatever her last name is, the White House press secretary, banned her. This is a
Yeah.
government official. Like,
Yeah.
what are you doing for putting out a news story? They're censoring this person who is literally a government official, a spokesperson for the president, and they're saying you can't speak your official government business or opinion on our platform because it doesn't conform to our opinion.
Yeah.
And it just a giant tech nightmare. You know, and I think after Trump wins, I hope he's going to win. I'm pretty sure he's going to win based on the
Oh,
numbers, not the
oh,
polls, but I hope he does something to finally do something to this oligarchy they've built, you know?
oh, don't you worry. Well, if you look up, for instance, Academics Agent's video on why Trump will win, if you look at just the energy in terms of the social media aspect, Trump is destroying Biden by a country mile,
Oh, I
despite
agree.
all of them being against him.
I agree.
Now,
I mean, I think it's going to be insane if he loses. I'm like, how is this going to happen? Even the early voting is showing that he's in favor to win right now.
yeah,
It's just that the polls have been so screwed up. I've never been a big fan of polls, anyways, but
now,
that, yeah.
sorry to interrupt. What AA talks about is default preference versus revealed preference. Revealed preference is the true reality of what people think, which is similar to the case of Brexit. All the polls said Remain was going to win, and then Brexit won 52-48. There's stuff
Well,
like that.
that's another reason to believe that Trump's going to win, is because the whole
Yeah,
Brexit thing and you
yeah.
know, your all's PM. Because now I know you say he's a clown, but uh,
I won't say Trump's a clown. No, no, I'm not
no,
saying
no, not
Trump's a
Trump.
clown.
Your prime minister,
Well, Boris is literally a
Johnson.
clown. No,
Yeah,
no, honestly, he is literally a clown. People
right. But
say,
at the
"Oh,
same
he's the
time,
English."
it was unforeseen for him to win, and he.
Uh, well, the thing was with Brexit, I know full well him and Michael Gove, who were the two main arbiters of the Leave campaign, they only did it to usurp David Cameron as Prime Minister. That's the reality of it. I won't admit it. That was the reality of it. Now, firstly, when it comes to companies and corporations in general, I've already thought of some very, very, very tasty legislation I could implement that will royally screw them. And
So,
oh boy, they are going to hate me for it. And I don't give a damn. But the main one that's going to utterly shaft Silicon Valley completely is what I call the Terms of Service Bill.
I think you talked about this before, if I'm not
I might,
mistaken.
I might have actually, I can't remember. The idea of the Terms of Service Bill is basically if you have a Terms of Service, like you have with social media and so on and so forth, whatever it says within it, it's like, I would call it like an evolution of contract law. So, whatever it states within the Terms of Service, whatever the company is has to honor that to its logical conclusion. So, for example, I know with Twitter, they say doxing, harassment, etc. If I find one, and I'm saying this is with my governmental power, me being a filthy, filthy, nasty, quote unquote fascist type here, if I find one example where, let's say, Silicon Valley are not forcing their rules properly, I'm basically saying, right, violated your thing, boom, there's a giant fine.
Right.
It's basically punished them, economically speaking, to the they do not want to feel my wrath, and you effectively force them into a position where they become publishers. In which case, if I find any illegal material on their platform, I can shut them down like that, or they become absolute unbroidered bloodbaths of freedom of speech.
Yeah, this is a thing that we could actually do in the US through 230 if it's amended, if it's reformed. I think a lot of this would go up to the courts though, rather than be a direct fine by the government. And I don't know if I want the government to regulate it that highly. I want the law on the books, and I want people to be able to sue for violation of terms of service, like they did in the Patreon case. But the idea that the government could do this, for me, at least in the US, is always going to be to the whims of changing administrations. But I'm going to leave it at there for my part, guys. If you want to keep going, Tank, I honestly got to get going because I have family stuff I got to go
Yeah,
do.
I've got to go too. We should probably.
That's a shame.
Yeah.
It's a shame. I had so much more to talk.
I know
Yeah,
we're at 2 hours though,
yeah,
kids. So
yeah.
like,
No,
we can
got
try and do
sidetracked.
this
That's
Yeah.
next weekend though, if you want to follow up.
could do, yeah. Is it possible to do it next Saturday?
I'll
No.
have
Not for me. Not yeah. I
Okay.
can't next Saturday.
We'll schedule it. We'll talk.
yeah, we can
we'll
talk
figure
about
it
it.
out.
Do you want to do our outro there, Bill?
Do I want to do the outro?
Yeah.
Sure, guys. Well, I appreciate guys, anyone showing up and watching us. We got a couple followers today. Kizza, we appreciate you, man. 2 hours flies by quick. So we'll definitely have to have you on again. And with all that, friends, you can catch us on, obviously, here, D Live, the ends underscore justify underscore memes, or over at the ends justify memes. We have replays on YouTube. You can catch me on all minus one on YouTube. You can find Kizza with Yiz the Unix Corner Club stream most weeks, right?
Mostly, yeah. We skipped this week because Years had friends and family over, but we should be back. Years should be doing a stream this coming Friday. That would be 23rd. Should do. I sadly won't be here because work gets in the way, but I would definitely be on the next one on the 30th.
Yeah, remind her I'm always available to. Well, I shouldn't say always, but I'm often available too if she's looking for someone to be on in general. I haven't talked to Yiz in a few weeks, so. But anyways, folks,
Yeah.
thank you all for watching, and
No worries.
yeah, this has been the ends justify the memes, and remember, the ends always justify those memes. Hit that outro, Tank.
I'm talking about all the way to the top, yeah. Unjustifiably in a position that I'd rather not be in, but the cream will rise to the top.
Okay, we're not live.